So I'm going to share my screen, which is just in case I'm not very clear. Here we go. Okay, so very briefly, the technology, all our voices, the technology. We're very new to much of this technology, so bear with us. Don't give up on us if tonight is not perfect. We have a number of tools in place now that will help us to connect and to mobilize. And we welcome offers of help. We have Facebook to allow ad hoc dialogue. We have a Gmail account that's working pretty well for people to, sign up. We are using Zoom webinars, and it's been a steep learning curve and fast. We have YouTube to share recordings. We're recording this webinar. We have used Google Forms for a survey very successfully recently. And of course, we used change.org for petitions in July, and we had 700 signatures in a very short period of time. So I think we have some tools in place to connect the islands, connect people on the islands. Housekeeping. Tonight, we have 2 principal speakers and 9 presenters, all of whom, as panelists, have voice and video control. And we also have many attendees who may request to speak. The attendees, raise your hand or use chat if you want to ask to speak, and be prepared to unmute when asked. You can also use question and answer to submit a question. We will do our best to manage the questions. If we run out of time or fail to answer, we may try to address them later in Facebook or by email. And now over to Miel. Thank you very much. I'm delighted you're all here.
Okay, so before we begin the presentations and the discussion this evening, let us acknowledge that we are meeting across the unceded territory of many Coast Salish nations and peoples. According to interpretations of the pre-Confederate Douglas treaties, the Southern Gulf Islands were not meant to be settled by newcomers. This region was meant to continue to sustain a large Indigenous population that was here. Within a few years of the signing of the Douglas treaties in the early 1850s, smallpox decimated the populations of the Coast Salish nations. The provincial government moved most of the remaining Indigenous populations into small reserves on Vancouver Island and the mainland. In contravention of the treaties, the province proceeded to issue land titles on these islands to non-Indigenous newcomers. There are participants here today whose family lineage stretches back to before Confederation, to time immemorial. The families of others of us, the non-Indigenous participants, may have been here for multiple generations. Others have only just arrived. We are all gathering over Zoom in conversation today because while our lineages and the ways we connect to land differ, we all feel a connection to this place. And we are all concerned about how these islands, which fall under the colonial legislative jurisdiction of Islands Trust, will be managed and governed. We all want the land and waters to be managed and governed in a good way. So, welcome to the first trust-wide citizen-led community discussion on the trust policy statement proposed revision. Today's topic is local livelihoods, private property, and Islands Trust's climate change regulations. Thank you all so much for joining. And many thanks to our presenters for their bravery and willingness to speak. The purpose of this discussion series is to facilitate public dialogue on the trust policy statement revision, and by extension, on Islands Trust governance itself. and to facilitate this across islands and across ideological and political differences. The aim is to bring people together to talk, think, learn, and listen to each other. The hope is that in doing so, collaborative and inclusive approaches to co-creating good futures for these ecologically unique, beautiful, and abundant islands, and for the generations of humans who come after us, will be fostered. This evening's session will begin with feature presentations by journalist and author Elizabeth Nixon and former trustee Eric Booth. Unfortunately, our third presenter, Shauna Dole, the Gulf Islands Forest Coordinator for the Rain Coast Conservation Foundation, expressed discomfort with the full breadth of voices included in this event and withdrew from the panel after we'd already circulated the posters. Shauna has, however, made numerous public delegations to Islands Trust, which are available through the Islands Trust website. Our citizen speakers are Corey Johnson, David Dennison, Freya Skye, Ron Spencer, Dan O'Donnell, Meryl Roberts, whose letter will be read by Moraith Boland, Don Leone, John Money, Carol Money will be reading his submission, and Mary Beth Rondeau. The session will conclude with an open discussion in which comments, insights, and questions from everyone who is here tonight are welcome. If we run out of time and can't get to your question or comment, please email us at the All Our Voices email address, and we will try to find a way to include it. Many people have been involved in and lent their support to various permutations of this discussion series over the past few months. I extend my thanks and gratitude to all of you. It was your early input and support that got the ball rolling and sustained the momentum. The ad hoc citizens committee that has made tonight a reality came together just a couple of weeks ago. It was Don Leone who did the work of connecting the right people and taking the concrete actions to bring this to fruition. Don is one of the moderators of the Trust-wide Facebook group, the Islands Trust Policy and Purpose discussion page, and was pivotal in conceiving and setting it up. Moraith Boland, also a moderator of the Islands Trust Policy and Purpose discussion Facebook group, set up the email account and YouTube channel for this event, and took on learning the Zoom wizardry that makes this possible. David Lindquist took on the graphics for the posters and provided a grounding calmness to our meetings. So thank you so much to Don, Moraith, and Moraith and David. Tonight's event is being recorded. I believe that only presenters or those who speak will appear in the recording. But if you're concerned, you could just leave your video off. The organizers of tonight's forum are new to this. Our strength lies in bringing together our diverse skills and opinions. It has been a steep learning curve for us, especially the technology. Tonight's event will not be perfect, so please be patient with the hiccups along the way. And we really do welcome your feedback and ideas. And should you feel called to assist in organizing the future forums, please let us know. You can contact any of us personally or via the All Our Voices email address. So this forum seeks to welcome all voices. Here we are allowed to be critical, and we are allowed to give voice to a full range of human emotions. There are indeed many emotions afoot with regard to the trust policy statement revision and Islands Trust governance. It is okay to express frustration, trepidation, disbelief, grief, as well as hope and gratitude. Not only is it okay to disagree with each other, it is expected. In a democracy, we are supposed to have different perspectives, and we are supposed to talk to each other about them in order to forge common ways forward. As we all know, the task of engaging in public discussion necessarily requires respecting the voices of those we disagree with. So I invite everyone to speak from your hearts and listen with open ears in order to truly and deeply try to understand the positions and insights of those with whom you may disagree. So without further ado, I am pleased to present journalist and author Elizabeth Nixon. Elizabeth.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try not to talk too fast, so I might run a little long. I'm Elizabeth Nixon. I've lived on the islands for 21 years on Salt Spring, and I bought my 30 acres of land 30 years ago. I came here in the middle of my career because my mother was fragile after my father's death. Our family has been on the coast for 130 years. My great-grandfather brought in the first piped water into Victoria and then Vancouver, and he built the city's water and waste systems. The meter for Vancouver's water was in the front hall of their house for 30 years. My other set of great-grandparents co-founded the Vancouver General. Speaking to the current attempt to include natives in our community, they used to be included in the community. My family, who's been here for 400 years, has married into the Blackfoot and into the Mohawk. And my partner, Jamie, his great-grandmother was full-blooded Assiniboine, and his son is Métis. My great-grandmother took care of Pauline Johnson, the Mohawk poet, during her last illness, and she was a cousin of Pauline's through Pauline's Indian family, not her white family. And she and the members of the Women's Canadian Club nursed Pauline through her final stages of breast cancer, buried her, and then raised money for the statue in Stanley Park. So from there, I'm going to go to my career because I feel that I have been mischaracterized on the island and treated as a somewhat marginal figure, which is entirely false. I've spent my whole year, my 30 years in journalism, right in the center of the mainstream, working for people at the very top of the profession in very rigorous environments. I got my first job at the Time Bureau in London, and I worked at that bureau for 7 years, becoming European Bureau Chief of Life magazine and working throughout Europe and Africa. At that time, everything was fact-checked, and fact-checkers, if they got something wrong twice, they were fired. If you were a journalist and you got one mistake, you were demoted and then fired. There was so much competition for these jobs that the atmosphere in these bureaus, when we were selling 10 million copies of the magazine a week, was fierce. So you had to be very, very good, and you had to be very sharp, and you could not make mistakes. I moved here with an assignment from Harper's Magazine in New York about how the island devised its official community plan. Lewis Lapham, who is probably one of the most famous editors of his generation, was fascinated by the idea that this community had built this thing, and he wanted to know more about it, and he wanted his readers to know more about it. So when I came here, I spoke to everyone. I must have talked to hundreds of people. I talked to, the sort of the star environmentalists, and I talked to the farmers, and I went around everywhere. I talked to everyone. And I'm a reporter. I do that. I've been talking to people on this island for 21 years, and I'm not interested in people like me who are educated and established. I'm interested in people who are not. And that is what most concerns me now. I grew up in a small country village. It was 500 in the winter and 1,500 in the summer. So I came here approving of the trust, and I still want the island to remain small, unique, humble. I don't want its space commodified by Vancouver lawyers who are building condos. I mean, I would fight that to the bitter end. I have a knapkept covenant on my land, including about 3 dozen 200-year-old Douglas fir trees. And I built a carbon neutral rammed earth house that is heated by geothermal and which could also be certified as a healthy house. I wrote about the trust on and off as a columnist for the Globe and then the National Post. And in 2005, I did a subdivision and density transfer, dividing my 30-acre forest in half. This led to a book written for HarperCollins in New York and edited by Adam Bellows, Saul Bellows' son. It used the thread of my subdivision to analyze the results, not the wishes, not the dreams, not the ideas, but the results of environmental stewardship throughout the US and Canada. It missed the New York Times bestseller list by a hair. I was on radio shows in the US and Canada, which reached over 50 million people. I drove, in order to research it, 20,000 miles through the back country of the US and Canada. And I talked to thousands of people in every walk of life in the back country. And everywhere I went, organizations of the trust, like the trust, had set up shop. And I'm going to tell you what that was. I read hundreds of policy papers, and I read hundreds of documents about endangered species. And I talked to the people who fact-checked those documents and who litigated those documents. I analyzed how much of the US and Canada has been saved and set aside. And the book received, at my request, because this isn't normal, apparently, a rigorous legal and fact check, which I had to actually pay for. It was so unusual. I also studied statistics, economics, and law at the graduate level. So I could analyze a lot of the science and a lot of the policy papers and a lot of the projections. My cousins were my mentors. He was a celebrated biophysicist who decided who got the Order of Canada in for 20 years in science. His wife, he ended his career at the Royal Society as head of the Royal Society of Canada. His wife, Jane, was head of the political science department at York, and she taught classes at Osgoode Hall. For 20 years, I measured my intellect against theirs, and they were close and involved mentors. I'm just saying this because they treat me like an idiot here. Finally, have I told you? Okay. This is what I want to say. I say all this because I've been characterized as a fringe person. I've been characterized as right-wing, which is also preposterous, and trust supporters have attacked me relentlessly every time I published. I am anything but fringe. I am highly educated and trained, and I have consistently worked with the smartest people in my field in the world for years. Here's what I learned over this time about the trust. 1, the regime that the trust created is repeated in countless rural areas all over the world. It is anything but local. It is top down, and all the legislation is written by people who have never been here. The legislation is dropped here through planners associations in league and directed by the UN. I could find the same phrasing used in the 2050 plan in hundreds of places, all of it originating in the UN's 2030 project, or whatever they're calling it this year, because every time it gets into disrepute, they change the name. The trust is not a local organization. It cares nothing about the people in this area. It has another agenda. So wherever these regimes are put in place, civic peace is done. Anger rises, largely because the regulation is not local and it does not serve locals. At the same time, because the regime is hated, the supporters of the trust become cruel because they have to fight all the time. They have to fight the unreality of it, frankly. That's why we have 70-year-old women living in their cars. And that's why the dialogue between us, all our different separate groups, can be so cruel and so bitter. I talk to everybody, and people outside the protected class of bureaucrats, academics, people like me, people like Eric, the trust is so hated. They are so hated by the trades and the people that make our lives work. Anybody who's run into it, who's working class, hates the trust. I got it, I'm getting it right out. Okay. This is everywhere. I mean, everywhere. You can go into a Ferry County in East Washington State and the same thing. You'll find the same thing. You walk into the mayor's office and she'll say, oh my God. Anyway, almost all, okay, this is the most shocking bit. Almost all the science, the papers that are meant to scare us to death, are faked. Writers for NGOs like Raincoast, in general, sees a problem and exaggerate it until it can panic people. In the US, when this science is litigated, it has been 100% found to be fudged. Every single court case is won by people who are challenging it. The Douglas fir is one of the most common trees in the world. And the range of the coastal Douglas fir starts in northern Ontario and northern California, and it runs all the way up to the northern tip of Vancouver Island. This new rule is based on splitting the species into ever smaller categorizations. Sometimes people, NGOs like the Raincoast, will identify a salamander in one ravine and say it's endangered, even though 150 feet away, there's another ravine where the salamander is living just fine. Well, that's how they trick us, and that's how they lose. Most people can't fight them, but the people who have been able to fund it, that's how they win. We need, in order to challenge Raincoast, a detailed, granular map of the conservation areas on the island, because there are hundreds of them. I have one, there's hundreds of them. There's set-asides, there are ecological study zones, there are the upland forests that crown land, you know, nobody really looks at. None of these are tended.
Elizabeth,
So,
I'm going to give you a 1 minute heads up here.
Okay, all right, then good. That's exactly what I'd like. So the biggest danger to the Douglas fir in the Gulf Islands is fire. Real foresters, those not muzzled by government, have been warning about catastrophic canopy fire for 20 years. These reports are all through the Forest Service libraries in the US. And what they predicted for the last 30 years has come true. These fires are caused by the green movement. Green management of the forest has led to tinder buildup, and then they're called fire ladders. The lack of clear cutting has meant there are no fire breaks anymore. Because there is no thinning, this is so important. The forests are clogged and no trees are reaching a healthy maturity. They are malnourished. They all grow together like little carrots, and they suck up all the nutrients in the soil. They suck up all the water, and they act as tinder because they're dried out and fragile and about to just explode in fire. That's what's going on. The trust has no detailed plan for the management of the forests that they oversee or somebody oversees, because we don't have local government, so nobody has any real control over anything. And nor do any of the other conservation outfits working here. And there are at least half a dozen that I know of, if not more. Okay, so I'm going to skip the housing crisis because I know that Eric is going to address this. And another thing that we
Elizabeth, if you could wrap up now, I think we have to move on.
Okay, well, I'm done then.
Oh, you can't say a last thing?
I'm done. I mean, I've said what I need to say. If you're only going to give me this time, I'm fine with it.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Sorry for the strict time
It's okay.
that we
I don't mind.
have. Eric, your second presenter, if you could unmute yourself, I think we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay, thanks, Miguel. Can you hear me okay? Great. So just as a little bit of a background for myself, I was, as I'm fond of saying, I was conceived, born, and raised on Salt Spring Island. I had 3 children. I now have 3 grandchildren on the island, and have been involved in the community in various different ways over the past 30 years. One of those ways was being elected to be Islands trustee in 2002 to 2005. Basically, I ran on the platform of tax equity for Salt Spring and also to try and deal with the affordable housing problem. We were having a crisis at that time, and a crisis that has gone on unabated since. With respect to the policy changes that are being proposed by the trust and the time frame on it, I'm just struck by the fact that I am not aware of any of the trustees, either on Salt Spring or on any of the other islands, that ran on the platform of these policy changes. These are not small policy changes. They're obviously the fact that this community right now that is watching this has come to the conclusion that there are challenges with these policies that are being proposed. What I believe at this point is that those policies need to be put off to the election next year and have any of the proponents of them run on that platform. That if they would like to promote those policies, they're certainly well described by now. They can run on those platforms, and if they're elected, and if in the case of the Islands Trust Council, the majority of trustees are elected on those policy platforms, then so be it. At least the electorate then have a say in it. With respect to the electorate, I've become aware a number of times that trustees and people who look to trustees have a misconception over what trustees actually are. The definition of a local trustee in the Islands Trust Act is someone who is elected to represent the electors of their Islands Trust area. This is an important acknowledgement of what their duties are. Their duties are to us as the electorate to represent our interests to the trust. The trust is the Islands Trust Act. So there seems to be a propensity for some trustees to believe that they were elected to represent the Islands Trust. And I've had conversations with some trustees who have told me exactly that well, they didn't understand that they were elected to represent the electorate. With respect to the issues that are important within the Islands Trust area, as Elizabeth mentioned, affordable housing is the #1 issue. There is no other greater issue. Climate change is not a greater issue. Douglas fir forest is not a greater issue. Having private docks is not a greater issue. None of those are a greater issue than the crisis that continues to worsen and has considerably worsened over this last 3 or 4 years. And we are at the point now where the prophecy that I've put forward for about 2 decades now, that the Islands Trust is preserving and protecting the islands for a bunch of rich people who have not yet been born, is coming true. In order on Salt Spring Island to purchase a single family home now, you need to have about $200,000 income in order to afford a median home on Salt Spring. It is totally out of the reach of middle income. We have a new hospital extension that is going on Salt Spring, and we will not have any housing for those employees that are supposedly going to be taking care of that. The trust, and when I say the trust, I'm speaking of trust council at this point. Trust Council needs to narrow their focus to the things that need to be done in the short term and not have the long list of strategic objectives that seems every term they come up with 20 or 25 strategic objectives, very few of which ever get resolved and are just basically a make work, in my opinion, a make work program. There are solutions to community housing. Whistler Housing Authority has dealt with those over the years and have the solutions. The solutions are not impossible. They are totally doable, but they are not easy to be done. They require courage from the trustees, from the people that we elect to support our needs as a community, because without addressing this problem, we will have no community. And you only have to look as far as Nantucket Island or Martha's Vineyard or Vail, Colorado, in order to see that what happens when you have a place of high demand and low supply. Currently on Salt Spring, there are less than 10 bare land lots for sale and something in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 homes. So to address those issues, that is what our trustees, that is what Trust Council should be dealing with. We cannot solve the climate crisis. China's use of coal, certainly India's use of carbon-based energy will vastly outweigh anything that we can possibly do on Salt Spring or throughout the trust area. What we can do, though, is we can solve the affordable housing issue. With respect to policy, there's one other issue that is indicative of the problem with the trust, and that's the policy that is not currently being followed with respect to application processing. And that I brought to Trust Council's attention in March of 2020. Currently, $2 million a year are wasted through inefficiency of application processing. Those aren't my figures. Those are basically the mathematical calculations coming from the trust itself. That is a result of trust staff not following trust policy that was set in 1993. And when I brought it to Trust Council's attention in March of 2020, Trust Council asked staff, well, is that true? Have you been following policy or not? 3 months later, the Director of Local Planning Services came back to Trust Council and said, no, they're not following policy because it's impossible to follow policy. So we're led to believe that for 27 years, staff had found it impossible to follow policy, and yet the taxpayers are picking up $2 million a year. Those kinds of issues of governance need to be addressed long before and look at changing a policy to of the kinds that are being proposed right now. So I would call upon the trustees, the 13 or 14 trustees who voted to delay the policy decisions until December to come together and say, listen, we've heard the public. We believe that the public really wants to have a say in it. And the best way to do that is to have it as in essence, a mini referendum next November by having the trustees who are running for office run on that platform and let them live or die on that platform. So I think that's about all I've got to say. I'm open for any questions for any of the things that I have said or anything else. So Miel, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks so much. We're actually going to have questions and comments at the very end, but at this point, I was hoping that I was wanting to give you and Elizabeth a chance to follow up on what you've said or respond to each other, and have allocated approximately 5 minutes each for that. And so Elizabeth, sorry to make this disjointed, but if I could come back to you now. I know that you had more content and I cut you short. So this would be a good time if you're willing to address any of that. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay, so one of the things I really wanted to put on the table for people to just at least think about, there is plenty of water. There is plenty of water. I've talked to senior hydrologists in the region, mostly around the Seattle area. They're the kind of people that are sent into Chernobyl to sort of clean up the systems there. They're right at the top of their profession, and they've managed to live out here because it's nice enough. And they can find water anywhere. They say, I also talked to hydrologists in the Forest Service in the US that said during the 70s, the land and water agencies stopped working towards helping people develop, but they started working towards de-development. And I believe that's what the Trust wants. That's what the 2050 plan is. It's depopulate the islands, remove as many occupations as possible, remove as many property rights as possible to turn it into an actual park. So I think the whole water issue in this area, we have been prevented from looking for it. My great-grandfather, when he brought in the water to both the main cities that we're all around, he had a high school education, man. And now we know everything. This guy says, I can find water anywhere. The longtime water driller on Salt Spring, 2 or 3 generations, said that there's enough water up on Bettis Ridge to provide for the entire Southern Gulf Islands region. It hasn't been looked for. So, is that 5 minutes? Do I have more time or what?
Go for it.
I can say more things. I mean, this is certainly what I've done for the last God knows how long. I would really like to see a strong local community here. I think we really, really need that. We need to be able to bring young people here, and we need there to be more restaurants, and that means we need more housing. I think our build out is at about 4,700 people on Salt Spring. Is it 4,700 lots or something like that? We need another 1,500 that is geared entirely towards lower income people. Either they can either do the Whistler model, or they could actually open up 100 of those many thousands of conserved acres and create a low income neighborhood. That would revitalize life on the islands. It would stop us aging, and it would make it just a better place to live. And I think that's what we should be focusing on. Make this a better place to live. These goals that are being set for us by the Trust and its supporters, they're irrational. West Vancouver could obviate any carbon conservation that we might do on Christmas week. I mean, it's just a waste of energy to do something like that. And the Douglas Fir plan has to be fact-checked to every single graph and every single number before we accept it. Okay, so I'm done now.
Eric, I'm wondering, Elizabeth just mentioned the Whistler model, and I know that that's something that you could speak to. Could you just explain that model to us so that we're clear about what it is?
Sure. Whistler, as probably everybody knows, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was going through a problem with trying to find housing for their employees. People were living in either in Squamish or in Pemberton, commuting to Whistler. So with all of the development that was going on in Whistler, multi-million-dollar hotels coming in, Whistler Town Council said, listen, if you're going to have these developments, great, well, it's wonderful, bring it on, but where are you going to house your employees? So what they did was they required the developers to supply community housing units. So currently there are something like about 6,500 but they refer to them as community housing beds. So that could be, as an example, about 3,200 two-bedroom units. So they've managed to carve out that many units over time. And the way that those units are classified, they're either ownership units or they're renter units. If they're ownership units, it means that people, and when we had the Whistler consultant Tim Wake down here when I was a trustee, he said currently there were a duplex, as an example, a single-sided of a duplex going for about $240,000 for a community housing unit would be on the market for $800,000, $900,000 if it was on the free market. So the units are covenanted. So an employee can buy a unit, it's covenanted, and the covenant requires then if the owner decides in 5 years' time, as an example, to sell it, they can only sell it for what they paid for it plus the consumer price index increase, and it's the average increase between Whistler and I believe Abbotsford. So whatever that average of the consumer price index is, they add that to the initial purchase price, and that apart from, I think it was a $25,000, if you had invested in 25,000 capital, that's the maximum that you can ask for your unit. And that unit then has to go onto the market through the Whistler Housing Authority and is sold then to somebody who is an employee in the Whistler Township. That's the Whistler model, and it's virtually the same thing with a rental unit. You get a low-cost rental unit, but it's covenanted that it can't go beyond a certain amount of rent increase beyond the CPI. That's the model that I looked at when I was a trustee. That is the model I still believe needs to be done within the trust area on all of the islands in order to carve out the community housing that's required. On Salt Spring, I've said for a number of years that it's my belief we need about 3,000 of those community housing units if we want to maintain the diversity of economics of our community that we currently have. We pride ourselves in having artists and musicians and craftspeople, as well as all of the service industry, hospital, fire department, police, all of those people. They're all in the middle class that currently cannot afford to buy on Salt Spring Island. So if we want to have anything resembling the community that I grew up in when there was 2,000 people on the island, that is what's required. And in order to do that, you need to do blanket rezoning, and it needs to be done in a fell swoop and get the crying over with, because there will be crying about it. But it needs to be done in order to secure the future of a sustainable community, because I can tell you, you can't have a sustainable community if you don't have a middle class. It's that simple. So all of this talk about sustainability that you hear, it seems to be all centered around the environment. Well, we are part of the environment, and that sustainability will not occur unless the people are included within that. And we have been in a crisis for over 20 years. There's been over 25 studies in the last 25 years on affordable housing issues in the Islands Trust area. And here we are on Salt Spring with yet another study. It drives me crazy. We did a study when I was a trustee, 75-page report. It's as valid today as it was then. No action has been taken, and I don't see any action really in any substantial form being taken anywhere else on the Gulf Islands. And what we are led to believe is that it is up to individuals or organizations to come forward to the trust with proposals, as opposed to the trust, to our local government, our local trust committees, saying, listen, we need to rezone property, and we need to do it now because cost of construction is going through the roof. And the only way that you can reduce the cost of community housing now is to reduce the cost per unit of your land cost. So until that happens, this community and every other community within the Islands Trust area is on a downward slide. The last census done in 2015 showed that the number of the areas in the trust area are actually on the decline as far as population goes. And that will continue unless we do something. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much for those really interesting and engaging presentations, and I'm looking forward to the discussion about them at the end. So next on the list is Corey Johnson. Corey, are you here? Oh, and Eric. Yeah, thank you, Eric. Corey Johnson is going to be talking about the regulation of docks. Corey?
Hi there. Thanks for the opportunity to talk tonight, Neil and everybody. I'm Corey Johnson. I grew up on Salt Spring Island, and after leaving the islands for several years, I've been lucky enough to return home, bring my family back, and raise them here on Salt Spring. My partner and I, along with our 2 boys, we enjoy access to the ocean, and we teach them respect for the nature and providing them with a lifestyle that we could never have realized in the city. I'm one of the owners of Island Marine Construction. We were established in 1995 on Salt Spring Island. Our team consists of 14 members of the community who live, work, and volunteer in this community. Our operations include dock construction and maintenance throughout the Trust area, as well as Vancouver Island. We fabricate the bulk of our components here right on Salt Spring in-house. We utilize local suppliers whenever possible. Local mills that we use for some of our timber requirements, and we make every attempt possible to keep the dollars that we generate here on Salt Spring Island with our families and our team members. The construction methods that we are employing are constantly evolving to utilize products which are sensitive to the ecosystems they become part of. Steel pilings have replaced creosote. Treated wood decking has been replaced by decking that reduces shading to the water and requires nothing more than a rinse to maintain. We're even exploring ways to remove chain scouring from the seabed through innovative mooring systems. We do this because we live here and we want to enjoy the same waters that support our livelihood. Docks and access to the marine environment play an integral part of our island's culture, keeping all the islands safely linked to each other. They ensure uninterruptible, safe access to the Gulf Islands and Vancouver Island. There are private docks that are used for access of BC Hydro and storm events, RCMP access to islands such as Maine, and medical evacuations from docks where the quickest access to a medical facility is by water. I'm deeply concerned with how this policy statement revision will affect my business, my family, and that of our team and our communities. Within the province, we are already heavily regulated in dock construction through applications and regulatory requirements of the federal and provincial governments, as well as by zoning bylaws already in place by the Islands Trust. The process to acquire permission to establish a dock today already takes 3 to 5 years, and some have been waiting longer. This is due to emphasis being placed on cumulative impacts of docks, First Nations consultations, and the impact on the habitat they are being constructed in. Under existing regulated processes, there are over 350 properties on Salt Spring alone that are excluded from ever having a dock due to eelgrass mapping as it exists today. We can add to this list exclusions for forage fish, bull kelp, clam beds, to name but a few. An all-out ban just simply isn't needed. The Islands Trust policy statement bylaws remove our autonomy of what individual communities to decide what works for them. My livelihood and that of my team and the islands will be impacted by the directive policy changes like those proposed in the statement. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Corey. Next, we have David Dunnison talking about forest fires.
Yes, thank you very much. May Reid, you were going to say something?
Just a quick, could you speak a little more slowly, please? Corey, thank you so much, but it was a little speedy. I felt like I was being rattled around. So
I've been accused of that numerous times. Sorry.
No, it was perfectly fine, but I just thought I'd give a heads up to other people. Thank you so much, Corey.
Okay, I will try and speak slowly. That's a tough one. I've got my timer running though, so I will also try and stay to my time. Okay, I thought we had screen sharing, but that solves another issue, so we'll be a bit more speedy here. Before I get into the
David, you can screen share if you're not able to at the bottom. You see at the bottom, can you see a green button?
Yeah, it says it's disabled. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Hold on, maybe I can change that. Here, all panelists, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, try now. Is it there?
Yes.
Okay. Is that shared?
Yes.
Of course, now I can't see what I was wanting to see, but can you still see that image?
I can see slideshow, resume slideshow. We could swap the order and you could just send it to me and I'll show it while you speak if you want.
I am screen sharing. So you can see the one slide with the big fire on it?
No, we could see that, but now we can see slideshow, resume slideshow.
Okay, well then we'll just stop the share. Okay, I won't waste time with that. Okay. Sorry, and sorry already to, it took up about a minute. Okay.
You haven't lost a minute. I think technical glitches just
also just a quick one. David, if you want to send me the slideshow, we can change the order and then I can share the screen for you later. How about that?
No, it won't be necessary. Don't worry. Okay, so I'm a relatively new addition to Salt Spring and the Gulf Islands, very familiar with them over many decades. Have struggled greatly with the new draft policy, trying to get my head around it. Appreciate very much the opportunity to speak this evening. Also should observe that the new policy does include a few provisions that I think are important and have great merit. Obviously, I'm not going to focus on those. But I should also add that I understand there is a full-blown consultation process that will be undertaken shortly, and I look forward to that. The 35 pages of new draft policy have given me considerable angst, and I've probably written 70 pages, literally, plus including at least as many references, trying to dissect and reformat and just digest it. What I have done is observe that I think fire, wildfire, itself undermines a number of key provisions, and I just like to talk about those, 5 in fact. First is that there is a thinking that emissions are someone else's problem, but we need to tell them how to manage it. There are 6 different sections, 319, 3110, etc. on that. The second is mandating the restoration of a contiguous unfragmented forest. I thank Elizabeth for already introducing that. This goes along with various proposed limitations for tree cutting, as well as trying to incorporate municipal authority and even Ministry of Forests authority. The third issue where fire plays a role or undermines the argument is not allowing desalination plants. The fourth, Corey has spoken about this just now, but restricting construction of new docks. The fifth, I think, goes to disclosure and transparency on lobbying activities. In terms of emissions, it's notable, having installed an air monitoring device, that the primary component on the Gulf Islands of our air emissions is our own created wood smoke. The Islands Trust does not monitor local emissions, and all emissions assessments to date have been calculated or inferred. If we were to actually look at ourselves, it might be fruitful rather than pointing fingers at others and telling them to solve problems. That really seems to be well out of bounds of the mandate of the Islands Trust. Number 2, fire and well-managed forests. Instead of restoring contiguous unfragmented forests, we need to intelligently manage our beautiful ecosystems for what they actually are, including for wildfire risk and impact. On that note, if you read the British Columbia Fire Smart Begins at Home manual, the biggest influencing factor influencing wildfire spread is dense, continuous forests. Dense equals dangerous. What we have on our islands are second growth forests. Elizabeth's already spoken very well on this point. These are not old growth forests, and in 400 years, they probably never will return to old growth forests. But the second growth forests are really, as Elizabeth pointed out, just tinderboxes. We are fantastic at creating fuel, and we need to manage that if we want to save ourselves, our homes, and the ecosystem. Fire and small-scale desalination. Consider if we had a major fire event that involved a watershed. That watershed could be incapacitated for months, maybe a year or more. You might be allowed to go back into your home. You might have already had an insurance settlement and rebuilt anything that was damaged, but you won't have any water. Now, not all the islands have reservoirs, so perhaps they should consider themselves lucky, but desalination is just a logical consideration throughout the Gulf Islands. Interestingly, the San Juan Islands holds up desalination as an exemplary reference in terms of the application of the state's best available science mandate. Yet in our draft new policy statement, we're asking to implement best available science and discounting the use of desalination completely. The concept that it is too expensive or harms the ocean are both fallacious. There has been an extensive study that underscores that in 75 years of worst case scenario, i.e. operate as normal, desalination won't make an impact in the Salish Sea. Finally, on fire and lobbying, I have to reference Elizabeth here, but I think her points were well taken on Raincoast, for example. And there was a very high profile case, Raincoast Conservation Foundation versus Canada, that has received considerable legal opinion on the judgment. But let me just quote the justice himself, Justice Stratus. And he found that this was an abusive process twice over. If asked, I would have considered a higher award of costs and perhaps even award of costs of a different sort to condemn the appellant's abusive process. So to the point of, are we factually based, science-based in terms of the major influences on the draft new policy? Unfortunately, we appear not to have been. But registering of lobbyists for local governments in British Columbia is not part of our Lobbying Act, so that somebody who hires articling students and law students to write policies for how to manage the Douglas fir forest does not have to register those activities so that it's open and transparent. Anyhow, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to listening to everybody else here.
Thank you so much for that, David. And I'm really liking the references that are starting to happen now between the different speakers. So next, I believe we have Freya Sky talking about glamping. Freya, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, thanks for inviting me, Miel. I'm not quite sure how my presentation fits in with the other things so far. Yeah, it's mostly about, livelihoods on the island and how we as residents can sustain ourselves. And yeah, so with regards to housing, there are a lot of restrictions on tourism, especially all issue with the short-term vacation rentals that are said to be displacing long-term housing and rental housing, which may be a valid argument. But I feel like tourism has in a way been demonized by the trust in certain people in a way that doesn't really meet the needs of the local island that has a big economy that is based on tourism. And I think it's really important to find ways where tourism does not displace rental housing and long-term housing, but actually supports people to be able to have a livelihood and an income. Yeah, and in my mind, one of the big solution for that is glamping, because we're allowed to have we're allowed to have bed and breakfast, but bed and breakfast are people are interested in anymore, and you have to have a large house with all these rooms and kind of compromise your privacy, and especially with COVID and the way that, you know, social distancing and all of those things, just bed and breakfast is really kind of an antiquated form of tourism. So trying to find an alternative that offers income sources to small scale landowners on a small scale, environmentally friendly basis. Glamping really seems to be a great solution. I'm a local landowner on the island. I've owned a property farm on the north end for about 8 years. And I also have a business that I sell geodesic domes that a lot of people use for glamping accommodation. A lot of our customers are on the East Coast, like in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, where glamping has really become a new trend, and a lot of property owners are, you know, a few glamping domes in their backyard, or, you know, purchasing a rural property and renting out glamping domes, tents, accommodation like that, that are, you know, seasonal, they're low impact on the earth, they're usually situated in nature, they're private, they're beautiful. If I can share the screen, I just want to show a few examples. Yeah, okay, let me just get rid of this. And then I was doing a word search about tourism in the official community plan, and you know, all of the mentions of tourism seem to support glamping, like the value of tourism that is compatible with preserving and protecting the natural environment, resident-based sense of community, maximize the economic benefits of tourism to the community, not to large-scale investors or, you know, the wealthy only. Encourage tourism in the shoulder and off season. Yeah, glamping can be, you know, 3 to 4 seasons, because camping, you know, is only possible in the summer. Tourism that blends well with the community, complements the rural, peaceful nature of the island. All of these point to glamping as a really great possibility for the future of tourism on Salt Spring, and for the future of livelihood of yeah, small scale landowners. I'm just going to stop sharing right now. Wait a second, how do I get rid of this? Yeah, so just I guess right now the trust sees anything like glamping as a short-term vacation rental, which really it's not displacing long-term rentals. And I think it's a really great avenue that that should be pursued to offer, you know, income to landowners on the island and keep tourism yeah, small scale, sustainable for everybody. Like a thing rooms on it, but your house really doesn't suit that kind of use. You should be allowed 4 glamping units on your property and have a certain buffer zone, you know, certain regulations for sanitation and that kind of thing. Yeah, so basically just wanted to put that out there as a beautiful proposal for the future of our island. Of course, the term glamping wasn't even around when the official community plan was created and the bylaws, and so it's just kind of a new future that we could envision. Yeah, I think that's it. You muted me.
There, okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you so much for that, Freya. Yeah, and I love those pictures. Those are lovely. And it's interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting in terms of talking about the care that the forest needs as well, right? And the relationship with glamping. Okay.
I guess you can have like very small clearings in the forest, and that is, you know, attractive for tourists to come to enjoy the forest. So you have big small clearings, that big trees around. It really goes hand in hand.
Thank you. So next we have Ron Spencer. Ron, are you here? I thought I saw. Oh, yes, there you are. Okay, and you're unmuted.
All right. Hi, all. Ron Spencer. I'm part of the Contractors Association on Salt Spring Island.
Ron, sorry, you're very, very quiet. Could you come closer to your microphone?
That's not like me
And
to be
shout.
quiet.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'm all things construction on the island. I've done all things to do with construction, whether it's to do with lot development for housing, land development for subdivisions, road building, road maintenance for the government, and as well as logging. So, and I came here in the beginning in 1969 in the middle of the turmoil where the Islands Trust was brought forward. Which was a good thing. But how it's affected us in our world, it hasn't really affected us in a lot of ways other than to slow us down and to make things more cumbersome and complicated. Basically, the Islands Trust and their mandate in the beginning, there was a land freeze, a 10-acre land freeze until the trust could get in place and start zoning. And they were put in place for zoning.
Ron,
They were not put in place as a government or to act to work with the Municipal Act or to be a replacement for the CRD or any other type of governance that's available to us. Their mandate was to preserve and protect, but it was to preserve and protect the rural character of the island. And as I drive around the island after the last 50 years,
Ron?
I mean, the rural character
Ron?
is...
I'm really sorry, but it's very, very difficult to hear you.
There,
Ron.
but it's not being maintained as it used to be. I mean, all fans. Yes. Yes. Yes.
We're having a really hard time.
Were you gonna ask a question?
We're having a really hard time hearing you.
Okay, I heard say Ron. Can you hear me?
Maury, should we,
Hello?
can we try to come back? I think there's a technological.
Yeah, Ron, we will,
Can you
Ron,
hear me?
sorry, we have to just leave you for the moment, so I will put you on hold. We can't hear and understand you. So
Can you all hear me?
We can, it's both. It's just poor connection.
Yes,
So we'll try and come back to you,
but
but it's poor. I'll text you. Okay?
Oh, yes.
We'll try to come back to you, Ron.
Camera
Okay, carry on, Meow. I'll text him.
Okay, thank you. So Dan O'Donnell, who's going to speak on natural resources.
Hello there, Dan O'Donnell here. Can you
Yeah,
hear me
now
okay?
you'll need to speak up too and try to get close to a microphone or something because you're very faint.
Is that better?
Much better.
Okay. Dan O'Donnell here. I've lived on Salt Spring for quite a while. Worked in the forest industry here for all of my life. And what I wanted to speak about today to the panel is about the a lot of the things that trust puts in place or is responsible for not happening is that it offloads onto other infrastructures where we had at one time we had a number of log dumps on the island where we had the ability to dump logs both on right in Ganges and in Fulford Harbor and Burgoyne Bay. And with the lack of log dumps on the island now, what it's done is it put a burden on the ferry system, where you've probably been on the Vesuvius ferry where you were trying to get a doctor's appointment or something like this, or go shopping and you couldn't get on because those darn logging trucks were on there. So we have not only the effect of that with from years ago, we had up to 4 tank farms that were right by the ocean where barges would come in and they'd fill it up with gas and diesel, and we didn't have the problem with the dangerous cargo on the ferries, so that we end up with whether it's just the timing of the dangerous cargo on the island, it seems to just interfere with everything. Then what we end up with too is when they introduce the soils bylaws that we used to have as contractors, and Ron might have been wanting to speak to that as well, but where we could freely move and trade material back and forth in a very efficient manner, where the Moccasin Telegraph went out and somebody said, I've got some gravel or I've got some rock in a particular area. So the contractors would work back and forth and share it. And it was to the benefit of the people that were buying it, because they wouldn't have to pay the trucking from one end of the island to the other or whatever it was. So all of those things that we end up, any of these policies that are put in place, it's like if you throw a pebble in the water, it's going to make waves or ripples. So anytime the trust seems to be doing anything or not being able to deliver in a certain way, whether it's housing for the people that are working here or just with the ferries and all of the things like that it just seems to be continuously offloading onto something else. And I don't see that as being the end of it in regard to what's coming down the road. If they could boost up the weights on the docks in the Vesuvius run, but I guarantee you the day that they boost the weight on the ferry, that the commercial traffic will overload that ferry. So we have just a constant problem with that. Our infrastructure is being strained all the way along the line. So, and it just seems to be a problem everywhere. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dan. Should we, in terms of Ron, should we go back to him later? Maureen?
Yes, let's just try again at the very end rather than insert. Yeah, I think we have two questions. Just as a heads up, I don't propose we answer them now, but there are two questions in question and answer, and we'll have a look at them later. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so actually then, Maurice, you're up next with Meryl Roberts' letter.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I was asked if somebody would read this letter. So the first, in fact, I'm tempted to share a screen, but maybe that's not wise. I could share my screen and show you the minister's response, at least. No, you know what I'm.
We have lost you. You've gone silent, Maurice.
Back.
Okay.
The subject was question on right to farm and property rights on ALR in the Gulf Islands. And I'll read. I am an ALR resident on Main Island in the Southern Gulf Islands in BC. At this time, the Islands Trust are preparing a draft to update the Islands Trust policy. It's being proposed that Trust Council shall coordinate with and advocate to the provincial government to ensure that farming in the agricultural land reserve in the Trust area does not adversely impact Indigenous food security and traditional harvesting practices, cultural heritage, or the environmental integrity of protected area networks in the Trust area. But, in capital letters, according to the Right to Farm Act, the Farm Practices Protection, Right to Farm, protects a farmer's right to farm within the significant areas of the province. My question is, under this new proposal, my right to farm will only exist if there is no impact to First Nations food security. Is this not a contravention to the Right to Farm Act? Our trustees have reached out to the public for input before this policy draft goes to first reading in December, and it is vital that clarity is reached before it becomes policy. I would deeply appreciate a response from you. So the response was from Lana Popham, the minister. Dear Meryl Roberts, the date was August the 24th, 2021. Thank you for your email concerning proposed changes to the Islands Trust policy statement. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries is both aware of the proposed changes to the policy and that many Gulf Island farmers and residents are similarly concerned with these proposed changes. On July 22nd, the Islands Trust referred the policy to the ministry for comments that are due on October 22nd, 2021. Given that this referral was only recently received, ministry staff have yet to review the proposed changes in detail, and as such have not yet determined if or how these changes interplay with the Farm Practices Protection Right to Farm Act. Ministry staff will review the proposed changes in the coming months and accordingly provide input to the Islands Trust. Similarly, please contact the Islands Trust to provide your input on the proposed changes to the policy. Thank you for sharing your concerns with me. And then there are just a couple of points that Meryl made, her thoughts on this response. If the rights of First Nations is to be addressed in the policy, then the rights of private property owners need addressing too. This makes it clear where we all stand. The mineral rights are crown, the trees are controlled, water is monitored and regulated, soil is regulated. That leaves airspace and land space. Drones can legally fly over one's property, and the policy states that First Nations have access to harvesting areas. This on private land, ? This boils down to owning private land with the financial risk, maintenance, taxes, zoning restrictions, bylaws, all the while everyone else has the control. This is not even talking about all the hands in one's pocket if you want to build. It is time for greater freedom, less regulation, and time to change the top-heavy bureaucracy. This policy is a noose around one's neck, and if passed in its present state, will allow for those in control to tighten it until private property ownership no longer exists. This could result in these islands being zoned as a provincial park, and we'd become visitors to a home we once enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very, very interesting exchange. Yeah. Thank you so much. Dawn, you're speaking about tree cutting, I believe, next. There, yes, you need to unmute. We can't hear you yet. There.
Sorry about that. I'm Dawn Cressman, and I've lived on Main Island for over 30 years, and I currently live on Saturna for the last 2 years. I own 5 acres of land with my son on Main Island. Personally, I don't agree that permits should be issued for cutting trees by Islands Trust. I feel that each island should decide for themselves what is best for their community. Autonomy, I really believe in that. Maine, I know there's a few people from Main Island on this and they might disagree, but I feel that Maine has not had a lot of problems with clear cuts that I'm aware of. I know that many, many years ago, the island was clear cut, but it has grown back. Now the clear cuts we see are mostly for building houses or the waterfront lots that want the view. Hopefully they will be replanted when the house is finished. I don't recall if a clear cut has created a huge problem on Maine, but I might be wrong. I never really heard about anything in my time there. I feel that instead of just concentrating on clear cuts and the problems from tree cutting, Islands Trust needs to also talk about house size. And maybe if they're going to regulate anything, let's have a discussion about mega houses, because they for sure will have to cut a lot of trees to build a mega house. And I know that Salt Spring is probably ahead of us all in having big houses built. So I just wanted to bring up that point, that we should also address that point. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn. Thank you. So next, Carol Money for John Money.
Yes, hello. I'm going to be talking for John Money. So it starts off, my name is John Money, and I've lived on and owned property on Saturna Island since 1945. Can you hear me okay? Great. I grew up on Saturna and spent my working career on the Gulf Islands, much of it in the forest sector. For many years, my partner and I managed forests for the German syndicate who held large tracts of land on Saturna Island and Pender Islands. As well, we managed our own lands and lands held by others. Over a period of 50 years or more, we harvest many of these properties 3 or 4 times, cleaning up and making sure the lands did not become a danger for wildfire or disease. Many of these lands were bought by Parks Canada, because of these properties' exceptional beauty and excellent stands of dryland fir. Early in my career, land use was managed by forest and agricultural ministries and highways and with an approving officer. Then came the CRD, later followed by the 10-acre freeze on subdivisions, but forestry and agriculture were still controlled by their ministries. Island communities were tasked with the help of CRD planners to create community plans and land use bylaws before the 10-acre freeze would be removed. I'm sorry, it's a little puppy, it's so cute. Later, the Islands Trust was created to administer these community plans and land use bylaws and supply planning services. When the community process started to create these plans, I became involved in the Saturna Planning Committee. We spent countless hours in public meetings creating plans and bylaws that we could get some kind of community consensus. Years after the Islands Trust was formed, I ran for and won election for Saturna trustee. I ran successfully in 7 elections and was a trustee for 21 years. I was a vice chair on the executive for 6 years and chaired local committee planning meetings on many different islands. I would now like to refer to the Islands Trust quest to control forestry and tree cutting through a permitting process. When I first joined the Islands Trust with my background and experience in forestry, they asked if I would please join the Forest Committee, which I was happy to do. I introduced a motion to suggest that the Islands Trust agree that forestry was a traditional and important part of local island communities, and that the Forest Committee be tasked with producing a draft good forestry practice policy. The motion passed, but no budget or terms of reference were given to the committee, and the committee dissolved. Through the years, on several occasions, I tried again to introduce a good forestry practice policy. Every time it was stonewalled by the executive. Controlling forest management through tree cutting bylaws would suggest that the controlling body has a good practices code, experts on forestry and fire control and forest diseases, and an open mind to process permits. Islands Trust have none of these and is groping for a mechanism to stop all tree cutting. There is no thought to the fact that many, if not most, of all community plans in the Islands Trust areas have forest zones, expecting some forestry. Also, there is no thought to the ever increase of buildup of dry fuels from distressed trees and the impending disaster that wildfire would bring to island communities, especially in this global weather change. Thank you for the opportunity to state my opinions. Okay. I'll mute now. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a amazingly exactly precise letter in terms of timing as well. It was exactly 5 minutes. So before we go to Mary Beth, could we try to get back to Ron? Has anything been resolved there? Murray?
Yeah, Ron, could I suggest that you check if you have any background noise that might be interrupting you, and also switch off your video, and then you can just speak, and we'll see if that works, okay? I can stop
So
your
I'm
video.
off mute. Can you hear me now or no?
Yes, we can hear you
Okay.
much better.
I've stopped the video. Okay.
A bit
Okay,
louder,
well,
Ron, please.
going back, again, I'm all things contracting. I've been, okay, is this loud enough? I'm actually shouting.
We can hear you.
We can hear you now. Carry on.
No?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, I'm all things okay. I'll try to continue then. Over all the years, I've watched the island, Salt Spring Island. I'm not speaking for other Gulf islands. Salt Spring Island is very unique in what it is in the islands, and it's basically developing quite nicely as I've watched over the years. As Eric talks about needing more low-income housing, worker housing, and all of that. He talks about 3,000. I agree with that. And the fact of the matter is, we're short of workers on the island now. Staffing is a problem, but the fact is that there's probably that many units out there, whether they're trailers, garages, backyard places to stay. It probably adds up to that already. And but the other thing is I have seen very little evidence that people are not good stewards of their land. I mean, this is mainly the Gulf Islands are privately owned. They're held in free title, and people have, over the years, I've watched different properties evolve into different things, from farming to forestry to letting them go back to nature, and then reorganizing them back into farming. And basically in a rural way. The whole character, we are now provincially, we are held as a rural community rather than urban on the Gulf Islands, which over the last 50 years, every OCP was based on rural, and that we kept the rural character of the island rather than having pods of units. The island has a finite development plan, but we also have to look at having a diverse community or a sustainable community. And that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but it has good meaning. We're looking at one of our schools closing on the island. We have lots of international students coming here, but we're losing the young families. And that's a really important thing for a community to grow and to thrive, is to have young people and families. As I know, Eric's family is moving off the island. We need to be able to keep these people here. The model that Eric talked about for Whistler is a great way to adapt, to keep young people here and to be a part of our community. The Islands Trust is growing itself. On Salt Spring Island, I'm not talking about the other Gulf Islands, we have passed the time when we should have our own governance, which is a municipal style government. The Islands Trust does not have a plan, and they're not set up to actually plan a community. And that the worst part of our island, Salt Spring Island, is we don't have a plan. Everything is one-off. If you do a land development, it's one-off. It's not connected to anything else. And because we have the trust and not a municipal government, we had no way of building our community around land development with CC.
I think we've lost Ron. And we're also at the 5 minutes. So thank you for speaking, Ron. Moraith, you're muted. I think you just tried to say something.
I was going to say I've got a little small poll that I can launch, and then maybe we should check out some of the questions in question and answer.
Well, I think we have a Mary Beth on regulation. And
yes, of course, I beg your
I
pardon.
think there was somebody, was it Dory Howard who showed up in the chat to give a citizen statement or not?
She asked to become an attendee, and so I switched her to attendee, and if she wants to join again, she can raise her hand or message me. Okay.
Good. So yeah, so let's go to Mary Beth then, who's speaking, I think, more abstractly on regulations, tree cutting regulations.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Very clearly.
Okay, good. Well, hello all, and wonderful to see so many people here tonight. I'm a retired architect, and in 2015, I bought a lot on North Pender Island in the infamous Magic Lake Estates. House building started in 2016, and I'm now finishing the house very slowly myself, along with YouTube. I should declare that I live on Pender half-time, year-round, and in Vancouver the other half. But my statement tonight relates to my career in municipal government. That's 15 years at the City of Vancouver and 10 years at the City of Surrey, in the area of regulating bylaws and guidelines for urban developments to make the city more beautiful and livable. And that included working with landscape staff for the review of development sites. So in both municipalities, I observed the introduction and subsequent regulation of tree protection bylaws. So a few thoughts. One, speaking as a regulator, that's 25 years in that municipal environment, avoid regulation wherever possible. That might not sound right, but regulation is best applied to those who follow regulations. Doesn't work good for others. It's very difficult to actually regulate. Two, if you have to regulate, match it to the government agency's ability to regulate. So for example, consider the budget for expert staff, such as arborists and landscape architects, and associated extra costs to taxpayers and time delays for the additional processing time. Three, any regulation needs to fit a reasonable application of that regulation. This point is that if the regulation is so far beyond what the industry or community is able or willing to engage, then it just leads to abuse and it nullifies that regulation. We have heaps of regulation that is not even regulated. So as applies to what is proposed for the Islands Trust Forest Protection, Tree and Forest Protection, and acknowledging that there is an incredible amount of concern out there in the community on loss of, on tree cutting on private property. Yes, there is a lot of concern. First, identify the problem. What is broke? My sense is that the Islands Trust staff do have some sense of this. Next, when considering regulation to fix anything that needs fixing, Ask what the most minimal tools are that can be used to achieve this. And again, it is my sense that Island Trust staff have offered some alternatives such as conservation zoning that will cooperate with private landowners with incentive-based authority rather than heavy bylaws. However, it is my understanding that what is being promoted by advocacy groups and the trustees is full authority for tree and forest bylaw on par with municipalities against the advice of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and to seek more authority over the forest on private lands from the Ministry of Forestry. From what I can see in my experience, I believe this oversteps and is not necessary. But this is not set. The phase 3 public engagement is coming in the next few months. And given my involvement in municipal governance, I think this is really important. I think it's a great opportunity, and I heartily encourage the community to take part in this consultation. This is the time to be heard, and it will make a difference. Thank you. Back to me. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mary Beth.
Okay.
So you said we have some questions. Maureen, are you able to read the questions? I don't have enough.
Excuse me, Miel. Dory was going to give a statement.
Oh, Dory is going to give a statement.
She's
Sorry.
on the screen. Yeah.
It's on the screen?
I am here.
She's on the screen.
She's on the screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't have anything actually prepared, but I do have 8 tickets. I have 8 bylaw tickets, bylaw violation notices. So these are not fake tickets. These are real tickets worth over $6,000 in fines. Mostly at least 6 of them are bogus. I mean, they're just ridiculous. And so I've been dealing with this bylaw. I hear you say, Mary Beth, about regulations and where do we actually need to, where do regulations actually matter and where are they absolutely ridiculous? And I think what I've realized over the past year of trying to reason and collaborate with bylaw and bylaw enforcement is that it's very difficult because there's no appetite for collaborative problem solving. There's no appetite for solution finding. There's no appetite for leniency or spirit of the law. It's about this is the law and that's it. And so then you're caught between a rock and a hard place, because if you are doing something creative like you, Freya, and getting into sort of a glamping kind of a commodity or a business, there is no room for that. And so you end up then trying to fight the Islands Trust, or you try to create a workaround. And the bylaws and the regulations that we have make us create workarounds. And everyone does it, and we all know it. Everyone knows that we try and figure out a way to sort of survive and thrive on our properties while maintaining the privacy. Even in this last month, many of us have been subject to surprise visits by the bylaw enforcement officers, which to me, I'm thinking, this is my place of work, of worship, of play, of living, of everything. I would never think of barging into someone's office unannounced saying, I need to talk to you or I need to see something. And so this whole power over and command and control approach is not really conducive to anything about creating this peaceful, calm existence of being a community where we support and honor and support each other. And I think, just getting to your initial point, Elizabeth, where you talked about the stress that a community has, and it just escalates. And that's why we have this divisiveness happening in our communities, because it's coming from our elected officials and also the staff of the Islands Trust. And it's disturbing, but it's also a waste of resources. When I think of how much time and energy and money has been spent into my simple 8 tickets, which are ridiculous, from my own resources, but also from the Islands Trust, this is what we're paying for. And there needs to be a different way of some kind of an adaptive leadership structure where we can adapt to the changing demographics, the changing times, the changing living way. Someone talked about the land how expensive it is to buy a home here. Well, very few people I know live in a nuclear family anymore. And we have to find ways to figure out how are many families going to live on one property in a way that is okay. So what if we have 1 or 2 or 3 kitchens? So what if we have 4 or 5 showers? It doesn't really matter, as long as, like someone said, you know, we're all being stewards of the environment. We're not damaging it. We're not bastardizing the land here. So there needs to be a complete overhaul of the bylaw, and there seems to be zero appetite to do this. And so therefore the official community plan and the bylaws, they contradict each other. They don't meld. So it makes it really hard to live in harmony and in connection with the land.
Is there a way to link this to the trust policy statement?
Well, if I was really versed in it, maybe I could, but I've been immersed in these tickets. So I haven't really had a much chance to really follow, except for this whole power over. There's too much power over. That's it.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Dory. So we have do we have questions? Yes. In the question, now these I was going to ask because I can't read them very well. Moraith, are you able to?
Yeah, some of the questions are quite long, but you can all see them.
And there's also the option of hand raising, right?
There is, and somebody called RJ Honey has their hand up. So you might want to try that one first. So RJ Honey, I'm just going to allow you to talk, and then you can submit a question or make a statement, whatever suits. Okay? Hello. I've asked him to unmute and nothing is happening.
Well, while we do that, actually, why don't I can see the question on the other screen here. So why don't I ask it? It's a question from Lori Miller, and it says, question for Eric. It's in the Whistler housing model, the developers paid for the community housing units. If this model were adopted in the Gulf Islands, who would pay for the construction of the units themselves?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So there'd be 2 ways of going about this. What we're talking about with applying the Whistler housing model on Salt Spring as an example is you're densifying property, and I'll use an example. 5-acre rural property can currently have 1 house on it. So you make a change, you say, great, 5-acre rural property, you can have 5 houses on it, but here's the deal. The 1 house that is the first house is your principal residence. The other 4 units that are going to go on there, other 4 houses, would be community housing. So the formula that would be done up would be such, it would be done in such a way that you have a win-win-win situation. You've got a win for the current property owner, who is going to make a small profit on allowing 4 houses to be built on the property. But those 4 houses are going to be covenanted, and it's either going to be a home ownership model or it's going to be a rentership model. Now that's one way of doing it, would be the private homeowner. The other would be, if that blanket zoning was already in place, there's nothing to stop that a not-for-profit organization to come along, purchase the property and say, great, we're going to put 4 units on there. So the construction of the units would be done in such a way that it could be done by the private property owner, or it could be done by a not-for-profit organization, which is basically just another form of private property ownership. But that would be the way that you do it. You're decreasing the individual land component of the portion of the housing. The cost of construction is going to be the cost of construction, but you could do smaller units, tiny homes as an example, and that would be one way of starting that ball rolling.
Okay, thank you. I'm noticing that we have in the questions here some questions from Mike Best, and I'm wondering if it's possible to actually for him to raise his hand and to actually enable him to speak. There's no hand going up? Okay. And I'm, Maureen,
So, Miela, just...
Can
you hear me now?
His hand is up now. Mike Best has his hand up.
And can you hear me? All right.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not on video, but I'm on audio. So, yeah, well, one of the questions that I asked has to do with what I do believe is overreach from the trust in their policy about tree cutting. And please, someone there who knows more than I do about the official rules with regard to agricultural land reserve, tell me whether or not I'm offside on this, but it's my understanding that any trees in ALR can be cut at this point in time, and that's a provincial law or regulation. So if the trust puts in a policy statement that states no more tree cutting, and we're talking about either clear cutting on a private property, or even selective cutting of certain trees, will that somehow supersede the ALR provincial rule that allows people to cut trees on ALR?
Is there anyone who can speak to that?
Sounds like another good question for Lana Popham.
Yeah, it does. And my understanding is that ALR supersedes the trust, but I'm not certain of that. Maureen, your hand is up.
Yeah, I am anything but an expert in forestry and tree cutting. So, but I did look at the last Trust Council meeting. The agenda there had a backgrounder, which was for the trustees so that they could enter into a discussion about, on the basis of the discussion, it was to prepare a problem statement for the ministry. And so they had a backgrounder, which is in the agenda for that meeting, and it's worth a read. And then there is a recording of the discussion, including some breakout rooms and a readout afterwards. My impression was that it was very confusing, that it was very poor clarity about how any of this would work. And that in the end, I couldn't see how you could create a problem statement for anybody out of it, other than the fact that it was very unclear. So I would suggest that if you want to know more and you know more already, go and read that backgrounder and listen to the debate that took place. Thank you.
Could I also pose a second question or bring up something with regard to what both Dan O'Donnell and Ron Spencer have spoken to, and that has to do again with occupation and costs. I think our trust is being somewhat stick-handled by some special interest groups, and that they believe they're doing the right thing in attempting to protect the environment, but it's at the cost of other sustainable practices. I think it was Ron or Dan, and I don't know which of you said this, but clearly there's an issue with the way the regulations have gone in the way of tree cutting and logging. It's become more costly to log on the island, more costly for homeowners to build because of the logging regulations. And as was pointed out, it's filling up the Vesuvius ferry as an example. A lot of people cannot get on as passengers because the logging trucks are taking up so much room. In addition to all of this, it's not helping to sustain the families on the island that are involved with logging or tree cutting operations. And one has to understand, somebody said a pebble in the water sends off a ripple, and that's quite true. The ripple effect affects many families on this island because we have people that brush cut. We have people that clear material off of private property. As Ron was pointing out, you have people going back and forth with trucks, and we used to have an easy system where homeowners could save money because the truckers themselves would be talking about who needs rock, who needs material, and where can we get it the most inexpensive way. The moment that these regulations come in and create more red tape and cause people to have to apply and get permits and pay for permits and pay for the application process, then the problem becomes house building or any other kind of building and development becomes far more expensive. Instead of making more affordable housing on the island or making it a place where younger families can afford to buy or live on the island, we're going in just the opposite direction.
Thank you for that, Mike. I'm noticing that we have 3 questions from Ben, which we might not have anyone, we might not have anyone here who can answer them or can address them, but I'm thinking that out of this forum, perhaps we could compile a list of questions that have come up through our discussion and send them to Trust Council to address. So I'm just going to read the 3 questions from Ben, and then please, anyone who wants to address them, jump in. I see, Carol, that you've got your hand up. So the 3 questions are, what will the proposed process and associated costs look like to obtain tree cutting permits? What scale of trees and specific job descriptions will require tree cutting permits? And will the tree cutting permits be enforced? So Carol, let's go to you, if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks, Miel. John has meanwhile just come in and caught the last little talk, and he knows much more about this stuff than I do, and I thought that he might be able to answer something. I do not know. John, can you just switch places with me, dear?
Good evening, everyone. I think the simple answer to those questions is that the Islands Trust really hasn't thought at all about any of what they're going to do with these questions. They want to impose the law, but there's absolutely no thought of how they're going to administer it, what expertises they're going to use, or anything else. So I think that's probably the simple answer to those questions. Thank you.
Okay, don't lean back. Okay, I'll mute you then, dear. Hang on. Let me see. There.
Does anyone else want to, Mary Beth?
I think there's a simple answer that if they go to full municipal act level bylaws, which I personally don't think is going to happen, it's just so unrealistic. But if they did, there's no question that there'd be extra fees. It's very expensive. And I can see them moving from tree protection to forest protection because, on a treed lot, you have to have an arborist report of every single tree. And in a city lot, it's like maybe 10 trees, and it could be 1,000 trees, and the arborist report for that lot would be prohibitive. So, but nevertheless, I think it's reasonable to say that there would be extra permitting fees, extra consultant fees for the owner, and extra costs to the taxpayers to review all this, because that gets forgotten too. That's
Ron
it.
Spencer had his hand up. Miel?
Yeah.
Ron Spencer, you got that?
Yeah, Ron. Yeah, I didn't see the hand, but please go ahead, Ron. You have to unmute yourself. There, you're
Okay. You can hear me now?
Ron, you have to take off your video and again.
Okay. Going back to Mike's question and then moving forward. Gone? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Miel, can you hear me?
Yes.
So
Ron, maybe
we'll,
we could try the chat.
okay, do you want, I actually switched Ron off. Do you want me to unmute him again and see how it goes?
Yes.
Or, okay. The video is off. I don't know if that'll help.
We were starting to hear him.
Okay.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, in response to Mike and his question about logging, you're allowed to log on your own private land. There are regulations in the province with to do with RARs and on the islands for DPAs. So unstable slopes or steep slopes, you have to have geotech report prior to logging, and you're not allowed to log within 30 meters of a RAR, and that's the regulations. Other than that, you're allowed to log on your own property.
So Ron, I think what
the thing about
have we lost him again?
you can't. Can you hear me or you?
Now we
I don't know.
Now
Can
we
you hear
can,
me?
but no, we can. So I just want to make sure that we're not talking necessarily about the current regulations, but about the application or the lobbying on the part of Islands Trust to be given jurisdiction to regulate tree cutting in the same way that municipalities have jurisdiction to regulate tree cutting.
And you know, in urban areas that makes sense, but in rural areas it really doesn't make a lot of sense, and it would be very expensive to monitor and regulate and to do that. I think again, rural communities will be good stewards of the forest and the lands and the needs for their properties. That's it.
Thank you.
I have a question from Westy for Elizabeth. It was on chat. Westy would like to hear Elizabeth talk more about forest management.
Well, I can only tell you what foresters have told me who live in communities that are perhaps more communities where forestry is a dominant profession, and therefore their forests are what are called industrial forests, and it's there that they've been most strictly regulated. But the problems are the same in our conserved forests and also in our upland forests, which I bet you no one ever goes there. So who knows what's happening. But generally what happens is that in a forest that has been logged before, if it is not properly tended as it grows, it turns into a threat. And as we have seen across the United States and all through British Columbia, our forests are just exploding in fire every summer. And it is because of the regulation that was forced into place after the spotted owl regulation in the States, and by the emotions of city people being manipulated to think that a clear cut was a blight rather than something that is renewable. And if we look at BC's forests, we still have a lot of old growth. But what we do have is a forest that is a danger. The head of Crown Zellerbach in the province told me once that in the 80s, they stopped them clearing the forest floor. They stopped them from stumping. They stopped them from clear cuts. And clear cuts, he said, were a fire preventative. Now, when you have these entirely irresponsible feeling-based regulations of contiguous forests that have wildlife corridors, and they go all the way up to the Yukon from all the way down in Southern California, what you've just created is something that is an enormous danger. And historically, I talked to one of the few men alive who is a philosopher in this area, and he's written in, I would say, microscopic depth about this. And he says the land is ever changing. The natives burnt, fires burnt, and then they came back. The idea that things have to be conserved in order for our ecosystem to be healthy is entirely wrong think. Nature is always in flux, it's always out of balance, and man is its best steward. And by that, I mean men and women on the ground, in their communities, on their property that they love and want to take care of, which is why these international organizations, which the trust is, are so contentious, why there's so much fighting in these communities, because they don't listen to the people that they're supposed to represent. They listen to planners associations and international organizations who are all prosecuting goals which I do not think serve humanity. I think that they are destructive. That's what I think about that.
So if I can just ask you a question, Elizabeth, which is then, are there steps that you would see need to be taken to address the changes in climate and the changes in weather, and to address healthy ecosystems? And I mean, what would you suggest? I mean, are you saying that the private property system would work? And I see your hand, David. I'm just, is this something that you can address, or something that should go to Elizabeth?
Well, let me just say that historically, and if you measure it, private property is always the best managed. The tragedy of the commons is absolutely axiomatic. So I want to know what's happening to the hundreds of acres up on the hills on Mount Maxwell. Does anybody ever look at them? I think that the trust has to have a committee of volunteers, of scientists, of which we have a great many on the island, that actually inspect the commonly held, the crown lands, and make sure that our island is not going to explode in fire some hot summer. I think that's actually more important than affordable housing, which I think is crucial. I mean, they're both at the same time. If we have an explosive fire, there will be no housing. So to me, it's more important. We have a covenant here, but we drag logs out of creeks so that the creek will flow properly. We clear dead trees, even though we're not supposed to, but I will fight the Islands Trust in court over this. It must be done. We cannot let our forests clog up and explode in fire.
Yeah, thank you.
David Dunnison had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Elizabeth. So answering perhaps some of the questions that even Elizabeth raised, I do have a background in forestry. More importantly, I have classmates who actually work in forestry and are far more current in what they do. And I just posted a presentation that one of my former classmates gave on Gambier this past April, before the Lytton obliteration, which I'm sure he would have included. But it does touch on fire smart applications, does touch on the second growth problem, the fuel loading. There's good pictures in there, pre and post treatment. There's good pictures in there about the accumulation we have on our forest floor. To the question of, does anybody go up the uplands? Yes, people do, including crazy people like myself. I think our forest could be in much better shape, would be my first take on it. But I've just been in contact with Tara Martin, who's been active on Salt Spring. And I know she's doing a workshop in October, and she's also actively involved in real forestry work, real science, not the kind we see from some conservationist lobbyists, with respect to mapping our ecosystem, the sensitive areas, and our related issues. So there is an activity underway, at least on Salt Spring, as far as that goes. Bruce, now I've known Bruce for 40 years. I first knew him because he jumped out of helicopters to do RAP attack on forest fires. So 40 years of forest fighting experience and consulting. He's consulted to a number of the islands already. This is a free advertisement for him. He's in Europe. He won't be listening to this for sure. But we do have experts who have on the ground experience on our islands, who understand these problems and what to do about them. And to the defense of some trustees and some activities under the Islands Trust. Tara, for example, that's in conjunction with one of our, or with the great assistance, encouragement of one of our trustees here on Salt Spring. So they're not necessarily all heads in the sand, if you will. But I hope that gives some insight. I am surprised, Elizabeth, to be honest, when I walk around some of these forests, they're not in as good a shape as I thought they would be. You know, we do have some nice old growth specimens. We don't have an old growth forest. We never will anymore of consequence. Anyhow, thanks.
Thank you, David. So we've got Eric next and then Elizabeth.
I'd just like to make a comment on the speculation as far as what would the permit process look like. My concern isn't so much what the permit process would look like. It's the fact that currently the trust staff work at about a 7.5% efficiency on applications. So if, as an example, it was $1,000 in order to have an application for a tree permit, you can expect that it would cost taxpayers an additional $12,000 in order to process that application. Until staff gets in control of their application processing and the efficiency, until that happens, I'd say you shouldn't put in any more regulations, certainly not any more permitting regulations, because they have not shown any competency. With all due respect, they have not shown any competency in being able to actually process applications efficiently as any other municipal or land use organization in BC.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
Just one moment in, I would like the conservation organizations that hold property here to have to submit a fire plan for their properties, because a lot of this is no-touch vegetation type conservation, and that's easily the most dangerous. Now we have a big NAPTEP covenant on our ravine, and we have some very old trees in it, but we're also surrounded by a lot of 5-acre properties, and they have their house on a 1/4 acre, and they basically neglect the rest of it. So no matter what clearing we do, those lands are left to neglect. And I would like to see property owners encouraged to maybe work on brush clearing and fire ladders and thinning, just to make the forests healthier and stronger. That's all.
Thank you. We are actually at our wrap-up time. So is there anything burning that needs to be said at this moment? Okay.
Did you just say burning?
Let's hope there won't be.
I think just local. That we have to keep that in mind. It doesn't come from anywhere else but here.
Yeah. Oh, okay, John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say very quickly, like on Saturna, we have over 50% of the island now is parkland, national park. And probably the worst by far example of looking after forest that I've seen. They're doing absolutely nothing. There's a huge buildup of fuel, and Saturna is a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. And imagine the carbon that we will not capture and the carbon that we will release, if you believe in that stuff.
So
Your hand is up.
I have a quick poll, and I should have done it when we had more attendees. I think some attendees are now in their pajamas, basically. So we need to move along, but I'll just do this quickly. It's just an experiment. It's just, what island are you from? There are 2 questions because you can only have 10 options and there are more than 10. So you have to answer both questions, but hopefully it'll make sense. Okay, go.
And then Mary Beth, are you able to give us a little summary of our discussion today?
And then I'll share the result of the poll. Okay.
Do you want me to do that now?
Yes, please.
While we're waiting. Okay. What I've heard is a lot of discussion about our governance, the idea of simplifying, and also the idea of balancing environmental sustainability with other aspects of sustainability. Right now, the focus of the trust is certainly environmental sustainability, but what we talked a lot about today is housing and fire as huge issues. So I think another one is questioning the science, the Douglas fir forest, and again, that relates back to fire. The sort of what's really being put forward is this scientific, this idea that we don't really have a role in our place because we don't understand the science. But you know, the way the Douglas fir forest contradicts so many other objectives such as fire. And then I think we talked also about how we balance the role of the Gulf Islands area in overall climate change. How much can we really solve? And how much should we be solving? You know, how do we balance all these priorities? And then I heard some talk about who we are and what is our vision for ourselves on the Gulf Islands. And a lot, you know, the reason we're all here is because this policy statement has been brought upon us and we're reacting. And really, this process is about, first off, figuring out who we are. And then I think, building on that, the idea of the glamping, it sort of made me remember that it can be fun to live here, and there can be a lot of good things, but we're really under a lot of pressure. What do you think? Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Does anyone else want to chime in with any last thoughts or summarizing ideas?
I'd like to say something in terms of living on the Gulf Islands. I think we're trying to maintain our lifestyle, and that's why we're all living here. And kind of it's the fight of our lifetime. So we'll see what happens, but this is great that we're coming together as a community. It's the first time I've experienced this in over 30 years of living on the islands, talking to so many other islanders from all across the trust area. So I think it's great.
Yeah, and it was just half a second, Elizabeth. It's interesting because this is exactly what, when a little group of us met with Adam Olson a couple of months ago, this is exactly what he said. If we wanted to have any influence into the trust, that we would have to do, we would have to organize across our islands. Elizabeth.
So the 2050 plan, I think, has this has a subterfuge built into it. I have noticed all of these types of organizations, they want de-development and they want depopulation of the island. And that is behind every policy assertion that comes forward. And I think we need to be at least aware of it going into this consult period in order to flush it out, because a little development in order to keep our economy strong, our people here, young people coming here, de-development is not what we want. We want better, smarter development with less regulation, smarter regulation, if that's even possible, which,
Dory, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to follow on what Mary Beth was saying around, living with fun and living in joy and living with ease. We don't come here on earth to live in stress and distress and fear and anxiety and all those things. Yes, we can experience those, but I think when we should be able to live a life of joy and calm and peace and harmony, both with people we disagree with, but also with people that we want to live and love with. So I think that should be, the bigger goal, the bigger vision is how do we sort of live in that harmony and togetherness, and somehow there's that site has been lost somewhere. And anyways, that's my quest anyway.
Thank you. That's a really good final note. Maureen.
Dory has her hand up.
Yeah,
just briefly, I'm going to share the results. Now, by the time we did the poll, we were down in numbers, but it's Maine, North Pender, Salt Springs, Saturna, and a loyal person from Denman. So hello, Denman.
And we did have someone from Lasqueti, I noticed earlier also.
Yeah, I think I'll do this each time, and if you remind me, I'll do it earlier so that it's more representative. But
the person from Lasqueti was the trustee, one of the trustees.
Okay, and somebody did ask how many people we had, and at one time, I could get the stats afterwards, but we had over 60 attendees and 14 panelists. We're down now because it is a bit late. But, for a first go, I think that is pretty remarkable. And thank you for your patience. And we'll see if we can figure out some hints and tips on technology to share.
Dory had her hand up before we go.
Okay, I am gone now. Thank you.
Who Dory did? She just spoke. Did she have her hand up again, Dawn?
Yes, she did.
Oh, did I? I just, no, I didn't actually, but I think the other thing to do, leverage more social media to advertise these sessions so that you get a different demographic.
And we could definitely, I was going to say, I mean, if anyone is willing to help us with the organization or have any feedback or comments, we really welcome that. Mary Beth.
I just wanted to say that it's great to be talking about it, but it might be better to be doing something about it too. And there's a lot of, I think, disparate letter writing and that sort of thing, which is good. And I've said this before, that I think there has been tremendous success with this approach. And look at what's happened. The policy statement was delayed. They have to hire a consultant to review public engagement. That consultant confirmed that they did in fact run very short. And now there's a very expensive and long process to take on public engagement. So this has been very successful. It's not saying that, but I would like to, I think we should organize into working groups or something like that, where people get together, go into the specific issues. For example, someone asked about the tree cutting, tree protection aspect, and there's a page on Raincoast that advocates take action and to ask for municipal level powers. Well, that can be turned around just as easily to write to the ministry and the premier to say, don't take action like this. And, these are action items that we need to, that's our next phase. Like, I think we're almost halfway through getting this thing done. That's how good I think it's going. And we only have a few more steps to go if we organize and really be heard properly.
I look forward to figuring out how to do that as a group. Yeah. Maurice, do you, no, okay. So I want to thank everybody for participating and coming, and everyone who hung in there to the end here. It was a long meeting, and yes, thank you so much to our panelists and the presenters and everyone who spoke. It's been a really, really interesting and engaging meeting, and I look forward to where we take it in the future, as well as the engagement that Mary Beth is suggesting and talking.
And kudos to all of you for organizing it. I mean, I've been here 20 years. Nobody's done this yet. So major props. Major props. Yeah. Okay. Good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night.